we're going to go into the next segment. And it's something I've been meaning to talk about for a little bit. And it's on globalizing the Intifada and how that has now certainly come to the West. You might have seen it on the news where a man was charged after he got rid of two Israeli embassy staff in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, this was not unexpected, as sad as that sounds. We have now had, leaving aside the conflict in Gaza. I've been saying this for a year, longer than that now, that the rhetoric that we're seeing in the US, the UK, Australia, lots of countries in Europe, eventually you'll start seeing it in those countries. We're not going to be seeing it in Gaza or Israel. We're going to be seeing it in these countries as well. And why is that? All of these countries have had a large, an immigration system that's allowed very large Muslim populations in over the past 20 years or so. And I don't think anyone really realized the impact that would have, because in one of my latest videos, I talked about how in Britain, for example, most Muslims, over 70%, identify themselves as Muslim first before being British. And that would be the case anyway. In Australia, Britain, the US, that would be the case. In fact, in Britain, more Muslims joined a certain organization that starts with an I over their armed forces. So if you think about it, this was not unexpected. And the problem was, if a lot of governments, obviously, you have the freedom of expression. You can protest against Israel, you can protest against Palestine if you wanted. Whatever you want, you can do it in an organized way that does not demean or vilify or especially physically harm people in these countries. However, after almost a year and a half, yes, I do know this is a leftist, and I'll get to that in a second, but after a year and a half of especially the left and the Red-Green Alliance talking about globalizing the Intifada, talking about, taking up rhetoric that absolutely is extremely anti-Semitic and borderline, talking about these ideas that come from 1940s Germany. Like, where did people think this was going to end up or lead to? In Australia, there have been multiple cases of potential mass casualty events that were reported by the police, lots of organized crime elements that were planning attacks on synagogues and whatnot. At the end of the day, the people that it's harming, if we can look past religion or whatnot, the people we're harming are Australians. The people we're harming are Americans. The people we're harming are British. They're the people living in these countries that are being harmed, that are facing threats to their lives. And these are very real threats, because these are organized and radical people who are leading this. Now, how this has evolved is through the Red-Green Alliance. Some of my favorite topics to talk about. The person who did this, I will not say his name because I don't want to give him any attention. The person who did this was a radical leftist who was absolutely, completely radicalized by online leftist rhetoric around this conflict recently. And I believe he was part of a rather famous socialist group as well. And it is ironic, Badadan, because Islam is an ultra-conservative religion. So echoing that rhetoric from progressives, it doesn't make sense. On paper, it should not make sense. So the Red-Green Alliance, so the red stands for leftists or progressives, and the green stands for Islam. So the Red-Green Alliance is essentially an alliance between Islam and the left, what you see in the modern world at the moment in essentially every country. Ironically enough, yes, Star Hopper. That is exactly why this alliance actually exists. It is because both parties their end goal essentially is to gain ultimate power and rule the countries that this is happening in. Ironically, like I said before, Islam is an ultra-conservative religion. However, all the voting blocks where there are large Muslim populations, they keep voting for left-wing parties. Yeah, so in this case, those enclaves essentially vote in big numbers for the left, which is why in the UK, you might have recently seen the Muslim Votes Matter movement. They were extremely successful in the UK, and I believe they got around 4 or 5 seats. In the next election, they're looking at significantly more. I think I've heard it might be almost 20 seats or something like that they might be looking at winning, which is, the Gaza independence. I think people should be very concerned about this. You know why? Because their goal now, they might say all this about Palestine, but once you gain that sort of power, do you really think their only focus is going to be Palestine? That it's just it's a thought. It's something you shouldn't even think about. You know why? Because the second it happens, and you didn't really need people in positions of power for this to happen. In Australia, for example, all the meat you eat are already halal certified, which means the way they slaughter animals is not very humane, for example. And on top of that, they've certainly brought about a lot of legislation to make talking about Islam high risk. They've put it, because of that, places like YouTube, for example, the platform itself has essentially adapted those laws. We're talking about blasphemy laws in the UK. I know for a fact that they exist in one way or the other. You cannot. The other day, someone was arrested for a public demonstration with the Quran, and at the moment, if you are unable to essentially speak about Islam in an area with a lot of Muslims, because there have been riots, there have been parents who had to essentially go to mosque because their mentally ill child might have done something to the Quran, for example. This is where the UK is at. So, and even dogs. Apparently, there have been some movements where certain neighborhoods which are enclaves are trying to ban dogs as well. So, it's certainly not a just for Palestine sort of thing. It's something much, much more significant. But here's the good news. In Australia, this movement tried to pick up, and it completely failed. They did not win a single vote. Not a single seat. What did happen, however, was the left-wing party, they are trying to appease quite a number of these electorates with a lot of Muslims. So we might be seeing a lot more policies that are geared towards helping achieve that community's goals. So whether it be Palestine, Israel, or how society functions, we're going to be seeing a lot of that, regardless of whether they want or not. So in a way, they have achieved their goal, but luckily, at least, I don't believe the Labor Party are going to be an Islamic party, if that makes sense. So this is it. I truly believe we're at this inflection point where Western societies are changing so fast and so significantly. And what we're inviting is an ideology that is antithetical to everything that we believe in, whether it's freedom of speech, freedom of religion. It's against all of that. Equality of women, none of that. If you think about it, in a lot of places like Europe and Germany, Hamburg, that incident that you might have all heard of, women do not feel safe like that anymore. It's not safe for them. And it's a huge problem that governments are so scared of tackling. So hopefully this incident, I hope, is an opportunity for people to sort of wake up, because it might have happened in Washington, D.C., But unfortunately, it is very likely that more events like this, and we're not talking about Israelis here, we're talking about people of the Jewish faith, for example, or even Christians, might have to live in high-risk environment in their own countries. And that is unacceptable, in my opinion. Hey, you made it to the end. As always, don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications, and give it a thumbs up. It really helps. A massive thank you to all my channel members and Patreon supporters. You are the reason I can keep making content like this. If you want to be part of that and help me keep speaking freely on topics most people won't even touch, consider joining the crew. Just hit the join button below or head over to Patreon. Even a small pledge goes a long way, and I would genuinely love to have you on board. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.